And welcome back, everybody, to Exploring Faith, Pursuing Grace. My name is Daniel Rogers, and I'm here with a return guest today, Brian McLaren. He is the author of Faith After Doubt, Do I Stay Christian? And most recently, he is the author of Life After Doom, Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. I picked this book up just a few weeks ago. It was released in May. Is that right, Brian?
That's
And
right.
my world has been falling apart since May. Our daycare closed down, and
Mhm.
we've been we've been so busy with end of the school year things. My wife got moved from third grade to kindergarten, and so it has been pretty hectic. And so it was kind of funny that I pick up a book about someone's world falling apart as as my little individual world seemed to be falling apart. But
Yeah.
Brian, it's been a great read so far, and just welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm always happy to be with you, Daniel. And sorry to hear you've been having those challenges.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's just I haven't had the time to read as much of the book as I would want to, usually. And it's been tough, but it's been rewarding. I got to spend
Thanks.
a month at home alone with the kids while Laura was finishing up school. And
Mm,
since then, we've just been able to really grow closer, and we've had a really fun summer. And it's just
good.
it's been great. Um,
That's great.
yeah. So Brian, you've been on the podcast before, so I know people are aware of you and your work, but why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself to everyone and maybe talk
Sure.
about what you've been up to lately?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, I was born in upstate New York, but grew up in Maryland. And then for the last 15 years or so, have lived in Southwest Florida, where you and I originally met.
Yeah, that's right.
I started my career as a college English teacher. I loved literature. Growing up in a Christian home, we studied the Bible constantly, and I feel like my study of the Bible actually gave me skills of reading
Yeah.
and helped me be interested in literature. Um, I taught college English, and while I was doing that, became part of a group of a little group of people who started local church, and so I got to be part of this church planning team. Not planning to be the pastor, just planning to be a committed, involved layperson. Ended up leaving teaching after some years and served as the pastor for over 20 years.
Wow.
Uh, and while I was a pastor, I started writing books. And when I left the pastorate in 2006, I've continued writing books and doing a lot of public speaking. I get to be involved in a lot of causes that I care about.
Yeah.
And for the last 7 years or so, I've worked with something called the Center for Action and Contemplation, started by a Franciscan brother, a friar named Richard Rohr.
That's
So
great.
that keeps me off the streets, keeps me from getting in too much trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly from getting bored.
Well, I mean, I know that the Center for Action and Contemplation has probably been important for a lot of the listeners, even indirectly so.
Mm,
They probably don't realize how important that particular institution has been in their own life because I pull from Richard Rohr all the time, and
yes.
from yourself, and from the podcasts and literature produced, and of course, the daily meditations. And one of the things I love um, about Richard Rohr is how he says that the most important word is and. It's the center for
Yes.
action and contemplation. We're not
Yes.
just focusing on contemplation or just focusing on action, but a balance of both. And I think that pretty well defines your life. You've talked a
Mm,
lot about spirituality, and you've written about theology and sort of uh, working with faith in these
mm,
very strange times that we live in, this postmodern,
yes.
emerging postmodern world. While at the same time, you focused on action. We make
Mm,
the road by walking, and
mm,
giving people the opportunity to participate both environmentally or even politically, and letting
mm,
people have that hands-on experience. So, I think that's great. I
mm,
want to I want to read a passage from your book to introduce you to our audience a little more. This is going to
mm,
resonate with them, and I think you're going to find this hilarious, which is why I didn't tell you
mm.
before. But you wrote this. This is on page 60. I was 9 years old, sitting in a church on Saturday night, mesmerized. The previous Sunday morning, I'd attended our communion service, our preaching service, and Sunday school, 3 hours total. Then my dad, mom, brother, and I came back Sunday night for a preaching service. We were back again Tuesday night for a prayer meeting, and then Wednesday through Saturday evenings, we were back to hear a visiting preacher who is in town to lead what other denominations called revivals, but we just called special meetings. Why would we need to be revived when we were doing just fine? Thank you very much. Brian, we called them gospel meetings because we
Yes,
also felt that revival didn't exactly describe our congregations, that we didn't need reviving. We're doing good. We needed to
we're
spread the
doing
gospel
great.
to all the other denominations. So,
That's right.
so just that's I didn't even realize that about your tradition.
Yes,
That's so funny.
yes.
Uh,
Our two traditions have a lot in common. Yeah.
they do, they do. Well, let's talk about the book, which I know is why we're here today. Your book is called Life After Doom. What are some reactions that you've gotten to that title so far?
Mm. Well, I think a lot of people are shocked because it sounds a little bit like a sensationalist kind of title
Yeah,
to people, and they don't think of me as the kind of writer who would write something sensationalist.
yeah,
But other people, when they see the word doom, they think, oh, maybe at last we can talk about how we actually feel. Because there are an awful lot of people who are waking up each day with this feeling that our problems are bigger than our solutions,
yeah,
or that what's tearing our institutions apart, the institutions we trust on to keep us well and safe and at peace, that what's tearing them apart is stronger than what's holding them together. And that emotional feeling is what I mean by the word doom. This isn't a doomsday book. I'm not saying the world's going to end in 10 years or something, but it
yeah.
is a book that says a lot of us are having a feeling that things are not well.
Right.
Now, a lot of people blame different people. We're in a political year, so
Yeah,
red state people tend to blame blue state people for our problem, and blue state people return the favor. And but it's interesting what they both share in common is a sense that we could be in some trouble here. So that's really the what I mean. And how do you live? Uh, how do you live without being sucked into a vortex of anxiety and despair or blame and anger? Because we see an awful lot of blame and anger out there in the world today. um, how can we live intentionally when we feel we're at a difficult inflection point?
yeah. That's so powerful. I know that for me, I have that sense all the time, and maybe it's because of social media, maybe it's because of the 24/7 news cycle. But I think you've mentioned before that there's a lot of money to be made in keeping people
Yes,
anxious and keeping people divided and
yes,
polarizing the two major groups in our country. Yeah, there's for people who have been given the ministry of reconciliation, there's also a force out there that's been given a ministry of division, it seems like.
yes. Well
And
said.
yeah, there's a ton of money to be made off of that. And so what this book then is doing is helping to address and maybe even name that sense of doom that people have, and
Yeah.
uh, give some people some tools to navigate that, maybe process it, and maybe do something about it.
Yes.
It's very reminiscent of the minor prophets, you know.
Mm.
The minor prophets were voices of doom in many
Yes.
cases.
Yes.
But there was always that, as Walter Brueggemann points out in some of his writings, it never ends with doom. It
Yes.
always ends up with life after doom.
Yes.
This doom,
Yes.
it might be looked at as a pathway to a new kind of living or a new kind of being. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Someone said to me years ago that a major skill in life is finding the advantages of our disadvantages or
Yeah.
finding the opportunities in our crises.
Yes.
And, and in many ways, especially when you think in the Bible of the prophets, the minor prophets, like Joel or Habakkuk, or the major prophets like Isaiah, you realize that their dreams of a better future are closely related to their sense that the status quo is unsustainable. And when we realize that the status quo is unsustainable, it can fill us with terror, but it also can unleash our imagination. What kind of a better world could happen as in the aftermath of what
Yeah.
we fear may be actually happening?
Yeah, so well stated. It's yeah, that prophetic imagination, right? That
Yes.
creativity that flows out of that. And it's not an avoidance of the doom, but it's almost a radical acceptance of the current reality and trying to picture, a better world ahead, a better world ahead. Um, y-
Yes.
you mentioned that there's basically two possibilities why people have this sense of dread right now, and one of the ones was we have this problem that we have to solve or that we have to come together to figure out, and there's not enough of us waking up fast enough to address it. But then
Mm.
the other side was a little bit more dismal, and that was we have this problem we need to solve. There's enough of us that have realized it, but we simply don't have enough time.
Mm.
What would you say? What advice might you offer to the people who are in that second group of, okay, we know there's something wrong. There's enough of us that know it, but we're out of time. What might you say to those people?
Yes. Well, let me use a sports analogy.
Okay, sure.
I have a daughter who is a professor at University of Iowa, and so that's where Caitlin Clark became a very
Oh
famous
yeah.
women's basketball player in college basketball. And then she and my daughter and my grandkids were such big fans of Caitlin Clark that my wife and I started watching
Oh
the
wow.
games.
That's exciting.
And when we were visiting them, we got to see a couple games in person. And now Caitlin Clark, is in the WNBA, right?
Right.
So let's use a basketball analogy. You could be playing really, really great basketball for 2 quarters, and when you come into the third quarter, you're way, way ahead. Um, and then things could go wrong in the third quarter, and the other team suddenly gets hot, and you suddenly find yourself way, way behind. And so the third quarter just erases all of your lead, and you
Mm,
now are behind. And now you come into the fourth quarter, and you're way, way behind. Well, you begin that quarter thinking we got to play our best so we can win this game.
yeah. Yeah.
But let's say halfway through the fourth quarter, you're even farther behind. What do you do at that point? Do you say, well, we might lose this game, so let's just walk off the court and not even play?
Mm,
Or do you say, well, whether or not we lose this game, let's play our very, very best to the very final buzzer, right?
right.
And I
Yeah.
think this is one of the things that anyone who's involved in sports has to learn. You decide what kind of player you're going to be, not based on whether you're going to win or lose.
Mm,
And so I think one of the things that happens when we realize that we face some very, very big challenges and we might not win, I think what that does is it makes us wake up and say, what kind of person do I want to be? Later in the book, I include a couple of quotes from the Lord of the Rings
oh yeah.
trilogy, Tolkien's great masterwork. And I remember when I was a teenager and I read those books for the first time, there's this long, long section where Frodo and Sam, his trusty friend, are going across mile after mile of horrible, dangerous, stinky, difficult landscape to try to get to Mount Doom, where they assume they're going to die in trying to do the right thing.
Right.
And I remember being a teenager thinking, gosh, this is talking about a kind of character that I
Mm,
hope I never have to have.
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
to say I'm going to do the right thing, win or lose. But I think the kinds of times that we're in invite us to say, if I'm going to live in hard times, challenging times, let me be the very best person I can be in those times.
Wow. Yeah. So it really, yeah, it just all comes down to character. And Jesus, for example, wouldn't have used the cross as an excuse to live however he wanted or to abuse whoever he wanted to abuse or
Yes.
exercise his power and might and wisdom and, in ungodly ways. He committed to the way of the cross. And that's kind of what you're presenting is, yeah, we have to play into the last whistle, play into the buzzer, even if we're down 50 points. And you know,
Yes.
um, I, I I've been playing in an ultimate frisbee league on Tuesday nights here for the
Oh,
past
great.
couple months. It's been really fun. And one night we were a player down. We have 14 players, and you play seven at a time. We had six show up that night. The other team consented to play six versus six, but they had subs and they could sub in and everything. And we
Uh,
were getting just trounced. And our coach or captain or whoever he stopped us at halftime and he said, "Okay, the score is 0-0." Let's play like it's 0-0
Ah,
after this.
yes,
And because
yes,
this is a learning opportunity, this is how we get better. This is how you can hone your
yes,
skills. Don't just phone it in. You have to commit to it. So I can resonate with that. Um, that kind of brings us to, I want to get to the current situation so we can even talk
yes,
about what we're talking about. But this
yeah,
might be a good time to talk about how both hope and despair have
mm,
a tendency to kind of immobilize us,
mm.
have a tendency to cause us to freeze. Can you elaborate on the similarities between hope and despair and how they both kind of bring us to a standstill, or how they can?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, first, let me say when people use the word hope, they mean many different things.
right.
Um, but I notice in my brain, when I face a bad situation, what I want is enough good news to tell me it's going to be okay. I don't have to take any action, right? There
Yeah,
is something in me. Maybe I'm just abnormally bad person here, but I actually think it's something that's in a lot of us, if not all of us, that we are drawn toward complacency.
mm,
I call this complacency bias. We get used to a certain standard of living and a certain pace of work and certain amount of stress, and we just don't want things to ever make things more difficult for us than that.
right.
And and so there is a kind of hope that says, give me some good news, give me some good statistics, tell me things are looking good. And that's all I need to know to give myself permission to return to my previously scheduled complacency.
Right,
Well, it's interesting. Despair, in a certain sense, gives people the same permission.
right.
It gives people permission to say, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to get better. So why even care? Why even try? Right
Yeah,
now,
like the
I think
basketball
we,
team who's down 50 points in the fourth period, you know.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they could just turn it into a joke. They could literally walk off the court if they wanted to, right?
right.
Why do I want to stay and be humiliated? But there's another kind of hope, and as you know from reading the book, I I found this articulated by a really unusual person. Not many people you can say are a poet, a a president, and a playwright, but that was Václav Havel, who is the president of Czech Republic and
Mm,
was a poet and a playwright. And Václav Havel said, "Hope is not the assurance that things will turn out as we wish. Hope is the conviction that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out."
oh
Uh,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
other people have called that active hope as opposed to a kind of passive hope. And so that's why I think we need an active hope rather than a passive hope that ends up being a kind of permission slip for complacency for some people.
As I was reading that section on, I think that chapter is called "Hope is Complicated." Um,
Yes.
it reminded me of this conversation I heard between two school teachers at a coffee shop during, I think it was during a spring break one year. This was just a few years ago, and the one teacher is a younger teacher. You could tell she was probably out of college for maybe 3 or 4 years, and the other teacher was a veteran teacher on the verge of retiring.
Mm,
And the older teacher was telling the younger teacher, you can't change anything in this school district. I know you want what's best for the kids. I know you want to do things the way that you've learned in college. I know you want to implement these new strategies, but this school district and this superintendent and this board, they're not going to change. They're not going to do anything. And the other one was like, but I just want to make a difference in these kids' lives.
yeah.
And so you almost had hope and despair mirrored there in a
Yes.
sense, right?
Yes.
The one
Yeah.
teacher had given up, and the other, she wanted to have that active hope, but she's being told she needs to extinguish that
Yes.
flame. Just
Yes.
you have to have the hope that maybe another school board will be elected, or maybe a new superintendent will come, or maybe a new principal will be hired that will, but you can't change anything. So
Yes.
it was two
And
sides.
the irony is, if you have that attitude that you can't change anything, you will probably be right.
Ex-
In other words,
exactly.
you don't have the attitude that enables you and empowers you to change things. Of course, this is, I think, what the Bible means with words like faith
Right.
and hope. But ultimately, you know, one of the most well-known passages in the whole New Testament is 1 Corinthians 13. And Paul basically says, look, your faith may fail, your hope may fail, but love never fails.
That's
And
right.
even if you lose motivation, it's love that keeps you going. You know, uh, I was just having lunch with someone a few minutes ago, and he is walking with his mother through her last months of life, and I did that over, over the last 10 years. I had a 5 year where I was a primary caregiver for my mom as she her health failed. And when you love your mother, you might say, well, she's never going to get better from this. But that doesn't mean that you care less and you visit her less and you try. It means you're even more dedicated to making sure every day she is alive, she knows she's loved and she's as comfortable as possible. Love, you know, I guess we could just say Paul knew what he was talking about when he said love never fails.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I thought that that connection between hope and despair would be very relatable to people in my audience because I know some of them might be in a church setting where on one side they
Yes.
might be thinking nothing in this church will ever change. Why should I even try to be a voice of reason? Why even go
Yes.
to this church anymore? Let me leave. Whereas
Yeah.
another one might say, oh, I have hope if we just hire the right minister, if we just sing the right songs,
Mm,
then we could
mm,
do. And they don't see anything within themselves that could bring about the change. All their hope is
mm.
placed in an
On something
exterior
else.
person or
Yes.
vessel or program or
Wow.
whatever that could bring about the change. And
That's another example of a kind of hope that ends up being self-defeating
yes,
because if we diagnose the problem as unscrew the old pastor module and put in a new one, like as if it
yeah,
were a light bulb,
yeah, right,
we're not
right.
facing the problem that there might be deeper issues here. And if we had the courage to face those deeper issues, we might really be able to bring about a deeper change.
Exactly, exactly. And I think as a pastor, you made me think of this. All the people who think that they should do something, they say they should start new programs for the kids. They should do a nightly
Yes.
devotional at the beach or whatever. And it's like they is the most busy person in the whole church because nobody wants to do it themselves. Um, so let's get let's get back to the sort of beginning of the book and talk about what we're really talking about here. And
Yeah.
this doom that we've discussed, it it's related to a lot of different subjects. And I love the way that you talked about this when you described the current situation, because people just think about either economic collapse or the housing market failing or the or global warming or environmental disaster or something like that. But you brought them all together in such a beautiful way that I thought would resonate with a lot of people. Why don't you just lay that out for us? What is the current situation that you're really addressing in the book?
Yes. Well, look, yeah, I'm so glad to get to try to explain this to people. The first thing I want to say is all of us come from families and religious groups and sometimes political parties where we've been trained for years to define the problem.
Yeah,
The problem is those liberals. The problem is those conservatives. The problem is abortion. The problem is, and we name one problem,
right.
uh, and that raises a lot of money. It helps people win elections when you can tag everything on one problem and blame somebody for it, right?
Sure.
I think we're actually facing a problem that all of us are involved with. And that, just as we were saying, you can't expect them to do something that doesn't, that fixes it.
Right.
These problems involve all of us. And so let me mention a couple of them. Um, the I do believe that I know a lot of people are told that climate change, global warming is a hoax. It's not a hoax. It's real. The scientific evidence is there. But some people, they belong to a family where they're not allowed to believe that, or a church where they're not, or a party where they're not allowed to believe that. But here's another way to explain it. I would say that climate change is like the melting tip of an iceberg. And underneath the surface are deeper problems. And one of the deepest problems, and for those of us who know the Bible, this shouldn't surprise us, it's actually given to us in the first chapters of Genesis. We want to live like gods. We don't want to live like creatures.
Mm.
And so you remember in the Genesis story, God says, look, there's this tree of life you can enjoy, all kinds of trees you can enjoy. Just stay away from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And when the temptation comes, the temptation is if you eat that tree, you'll be like gods.
Mm.
Now, gods, we might think in the ancient world, were like supermen. They had powers that they could break all the rules and get away with it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and all of us in a certain way, when we're little kids, we wish we could be Superman and fly, be, an exception to the laws of gravity, for
Yeah.
example.
Right.
Well, we human beings, here's a way to say it. For thousands of years, we would suck more out of the earth, more resources out of the earth than the earth could replenish. And we would pump out more wastes into the earth than the earth could detoxify. Um, and and that's just a fact. And that's why people would use up the soil in one area. Interestingly, for those of us who know the Bible had these very strict rules. You should let your soil go fallow. Your soil has to be able to replenish before you keep sucking the nutrients out of it.
Right.
Well, we didn't want to do that. We didn't trust it. We just wanted more money, so we would keep working it. The Bible says you ought to take a rest. You can't work all the time. You have to replenish your body. We just wanted to make more money, have more power, so we work all the time. And so, just as the earth suffers, so our bodies suffer. Not only that, our relationships. The Bible teaches us in 100 different ways. You can't keep hurting people and then expect your relationships to be good. You have to go to them and admit that you were wrong and ask for their forgiveness. You can't just keep holding up bitterness against people and expect it to not affect your relationships.
Right.
You have to maintain the health of your relationships. You can't keep taking without giving. Well, that's the way we've been living. We've been living that way with the earth. We've been living that way with each other. In some ways, we've been living that way with ourselves. And a lot of us are looking around and seeing what's going on in our world as symptoms of that disease that was diagnosed in Genesis, that we want to play God and not be creatures in this beautiful world God made. So that's one way to describe it. The word for that scientists use is overshoot.
Hmm.
When you suck out more than the earth can replenish and you pump out more waste than the earth can detoxify, what that means is every generation, children inherit a less healthy world than their parents inherited, and they leave their children a less healthy world than they inherited. And that's been happening for a long time. And many of us feel and see the evidence that we're going to reap what we have sown for that behavior.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned how that can be seen in the individual, and I think any person can resonate with that.
Yeah.
Everything demands our focused attention, as you talk about. I mean, we
Yeah.
have this little device here that we carry on 24/7,
Yes.
and you might put your phone down and say, "I'm not going to look at my phone for the next hour." And then you get that text from your mom, or you get that message from your friend on social media, and you look at it, and then you see the notification, and you're like, wait, what's this notification about? And then here 30 minutes later, you're scrolling through TikTok or YouTube shorts or something, and where did all the
Yes.
time go? And our whole life is like that. You
Yeah.
try to scheduling church events, you have to work
Yes.
around 16 different ball schedules and 14 family vacations, and it's so hard to get a group of people together, it seems like.
Yes.
And if we're doing that to ourselves, we're
Yeah.
probably doing that to service workers in our community. We're probably doing that to the hospital staff. We're probably doing that
Yes.
to teachers
To
and
the teachers.
educators.
Yes.
Yeah, and if we're doing that to the people in the community and we can see that, then how far fetched is it to think that we could be doing that to our world?
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, the Hebrew prophets had such a strong connection to the health of the land.
Yes.
This was not a promised land that they were given to dominate and to suck all the resources out of, but it was a land that was flowing with milk and honey, as if to
Yeah.
say, this land has enough. This is a gift. This is
Yeah.
you live on it, you tend it, you take care of it, and it will provide enough for you. But kind of like Samuel foresaw, as Israel was begging for a king, the king is going to take, he's going to take, he's going to take.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you look at the time, this is like, I'm kind of jumping around in my brain here, but you look at the timeline from when Saul was appointed as king to the Babylonian captivity, they read back into that and they go, oh, well, we're in captivity for 70 years because that's how many land Sabbaths we've missed.
Yes.
For
Yes.
490 years, that is, since we started having kings, we've stopped keeping this land Sabbath, and that's
Yes.
the reason for our captivity.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so it's the idea that we have to take care of the earth, the idea that we could um, we could reap more than what's there, and we could be putting back more waste than what the earth can handle is
Yeah.
not an anti-biblical or an extra-biblical idea. I mean, it's right there within Scripture.
It's right there.
Yeah,
And in fact,
from the very beginning.
one of the things I do later in the book, I have two chapters where I give an overview of the Bible from beginning to end as a as an ecological text, as a book that's telling us how to live in a responsible way with the earth and of course with one another as well. And this is wisdom that we really need. And if I can use language that's familiar to both of us from our religious backgrounds, what I guess I'm also saying is that our Christian faith has in many ways soft pedaled the parts of the Bible that tell us that we have to live within limits.
Yeah,
And we've in a way we've interpreted the Bible in a way that just helped us make more money, whether that was by we read the Bible in a way that gave white people permission to enslave black people, where we should have been smarter and better hearted than that.
right.
But we use the Bible instead of to teach us to love our neighbors ourselves, to give us again a carte blanche, a permission slip to
Yeah,
exploit other people, just as we were exploiting the earth. A lot of people are shocked when they learn that in the 1800s, children were being exploited for work. That children were working in factories, children were working in horrible conditions, and now we look and say, how could people be so heartless to exploit children? But we found ways to do it, and we're at a place in our history where we're going to have to face what Paul said, that you reap what you sow. Now, thank God for forgiveness,
yeah,
but forgiveness is never meant as a permission to keep sowing bad seed,
right.
uh, and think we'll get away with it.
Yeah,
So
Paul said,
that's the goal.
Paul said, can we continue in sin that grace may abound? By
May
no
it never
means. Yeah.
be.
Yeah, may
That's
it never
right.
be. Exactly. Um, yeah, forgiveness is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And you're right. One of the things that the New Testament stresses over and over again is living within our means and learning to be content.
Yes.
Jesus instructed his disciples needed not to carry more than you need.
Yes.
When they were going out on their discipleship journeys, or Paul expressed the importance of learning to be content in whatever state we find ourselves. And
Yes.
he and then in the Pauline tradition, there's the passage in the letters to Timothy that talk about how the love of money is not just the root of all kinds of evil, but those who pursue it pierce themselves through with
Yes.
many different arrows. And
Oh my goodness.
we've missed it all, haven't we?
And those are self-inflicted wounds.
Yes,
And we
they
can
are.
imagine we've seen individuals do it, but maybe we haven't seen cultures do it, nations do it, where we realize, hold it, a whole nation can can sabotage themselves. Their greatest enemy isn't across a border. Their greatest enemy is inside each of them. And
Right.
so and when we think about repentance in this way, repentance isn't some horrible, gloomy thing. Repentance is this incredible opportunity to say, wow, we've been missing the boat. But now we get to rethink our relationship to the earth and rethink our relationship to our neighbor and our relationship to ourselves and to time and possessions and money and so many things.
Yes, my wife and I are dealing with that about possessions and materials right now. We have uh, recently gotten a call from her mom who said, "Okay, I'm cleaning out my basement. Laura, you have to come get all the stuff from high school that's still here. I'm gonna have to sell it on eBay. You're gonna have to come get it." So now we have all these boxes that we're having to go through. And at one point we were like, "Wait a minute, we haven't looked at this stuff in what 15 years." We haven't needed it in so long. There might be some memorabilia in these boxes, but the bulk of it is going to make a really fun trip to the thrift store. you know. Um,
Yes.
but we don't realize that though in our culture,
Yes.
and we spread
Yeah.
ourselves so thin.
Yeah.
Let's specifically with climate change, Brian. You told this story in the book about how there was this, I guess, a young woman came up to you after one of your sermons
Yeah.
and opened your eyes to this reality. Can you relate that story to the
Sure.
audience today? Yeah.
Sure. Well, I was a pastor in the Washington, D.C. area, uh, and just part of my own sense of who I am as a human being and my own sense of calling. I've always, for example, one of my favorite hymns growing up was "Fairest Lord Jesus" because it was a hymn where we sang, "Fair are the meadows, fairer still the woodlands, robed in the blooming garb of spring." My love for God was deeply entangled with my love for God's beautiful world.
Yeah.
That psalm that speaks of that we consider the stars, we consider the hand that God's handiwork. The beauty of nature made me love God. So I preached a sermon on our responsibility to care for the environment. And a young woman came up to me after the sermon and let me say it differently. Let me say our responsibility to care for this beautiful, fragile earth.
Yeah.
Because I notice even in saying the word environment, for some people that's become a political word, and
Yeah.
they're going to just say, I don't want to listen to this guy just because I'm using a word. So let me say, we have to care for God's creation, if that language will help people, that we should join God in God's love for creation. And so this woman came up to me. She said, I've never heard a sermon like this in my whole life of going to church.
Wow.
And she said, this means a lot to me because I'm an environmental studies major. And she said, I noticed in your whole sermon, you never mentioned global warming. And I had never even heard the word global warming. This is in the 1990s. I'd heard of something that of a kind of global cooling that they called nuclear winter, that people were worried about if there was a nuclear war. And so I said, are you talking about nuclear winter? She said, oh, no. She said, you've never heard of global warming. She said, I want you to go home. And we had, the internet was still somewhat new to us in the 90s. She said, I want you to go home and just look up the term global warming online. And so back in those days, it wasn't Google, it was Alta Vista, or there are all these other search engines.
You had to ask
And I
ask
looked,
Jeeves maybe.
Ask Jeeves, right? It was all
Yeah.
those sort of things. So I looked it up and I came upon a website, and it was very slow to load because our speeds weren't that good then.
Yeah.
But in this on this web page, they showed the Arctic ice sheet over the last 60 years or so. And as we know, the ice sheet grows to a maximum in the winter in the Arctic, and then it
Mhm.
shrinks to a minimum in the late summer, early fall. And so what they did is they would have a line that would show the maximum and minimum of ice in the Arctic. And they would fast forward this year by year. And when I looked at it over those 60 years, I could visually see the ice sheet shrinking.
Yeah.
Uh, there might have been one year where it got bigger than the year before, but then there'd be 3 years where it got smaller. And the overall effect over 60 years was much smaller. And my eyes saw an evidence of what was happening. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but there was a group that had come together uh, called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and more hours of scientific research was being has been invested in this work than if you took all the scientific research on cancer, all the scientific research on diabetes,
Wow.
you added up all that research together. Look, we all trust when doctors tell us you need chemotherapy. We trust when doctors say you need some antibiotic, you have an infection. Um, and yet, some people don't want to trust the scientists when they say the evidence has accumulated that we're heating up the earth. And the reason we're doing it is because it's like we've thrown a blanket around the earth to hold heat in.
Yeah.
And that blanket is the carbon that goes into the sky each time we burn uh, oil, coal,
Mm.
gas, and so on. So that was a moment when my life began to change.
Oh wow. Yeah, I could see how revolutionary that would be. And I encourage the people to go and read the book and read that chapter and see it. I think you gave 3 or 4 reasons why that really stood out to you as an important issue.
Yeah.
Um, One of the other stories that you told right alongside that was how your grandfather was
Mm,
basically answering some of your questions at a very young age. And one of the things that he said was, the earth has enough for us because Jesus is going to come back before too long, and there's no way we could ever use up all these resources before the return of Christ. And that reminded me of my own personal experience of where I was asking about global warming to, I think it was my mom, and she said, "Well, Daniel, the only global warming the Bible talks about is when Jesus returns to burn up the earth with flaming fire at his second coming."
mm,
That's the only global warming that we have to worry about. And I
mm.
heard that several other times in different sermons, where the pastor would kind of make fun of global warming and then make that point about, the only global warming these scientists need to worry about, these liberal scientists need to worry about is Jesus coming in vengeance at his second coming,
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of thing. Um, but that whole discussion reminded me of something that Rob Bell had said in his book Love Wins, and that is that eschatology shapes ethic.
yes,
How have you seen different people grapple with this environmental problem in relationship to their eschatology? I mean, I know
yes,
sometimes it can be anything from a denial, like with premillennialism, perhaps, well, Jesus
yes,
is coming back so soon, there's no way we could even ever get to the point where climate change would even be a real problem for us. But then on the other hand, you might have that more hopeful,
mm,
to use that word, side of things where it's, well,
yeah,
Jesus is coming back fairly soon to give us a new heaven and new earth, so we
mm,
can't stop we can't fix anything now, but God's going to step in and fix it all before too long
yes,
anyways.
yeah,
How have you seen that affect the way people talk about this subject?
yes. Yes, I have to. I wish this were true, but when you ask this question, the honest answer that comes to my mind is I've seen people's eschatology affect them negatively a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've seen it give them an excuse to be a worse person than they might have been otherwise.
yeah,
Like you know, through all the years of slavery, white people had all kinds of ways they could quote the Bible and say, "Hey, these people are going to go to heaven. So the few years that they're a slave, it doesn't really matter, right?"
yeah,
I mean, what a cheap and vicious and tacky thing to say. Yet they felt very pious, and they heard their preachers and maybe their parents and grandparents say such things, and they felt pious and good in repeating them. But I look back and I think, gosh, I think their eschatology made them worse people
yeah,
than they would have been if they just had general human kindness. And it reminds me of a scene that comes up in the Gospels where Jesus says to people, "Which of you who has a son or daughter who's begging you for bread will give him a scorpion instead?"
yeah,
Um, or which of you, if you have a ox that falls into a hole on the Sabbath day, won't try to get him out? In other words, Jesus says basic human compassion makes a parent care for their child. Basic human compassion makes a farmer care for his ox, right?
yeah.
Uh, and he's basically saying, don't you dare use religion to make you even less compassionate than a normal person would be.
Right. It's like whenever James sort of throws his hands up and he says, "Pure religion and undefiled before the Father is this, to care for the fatherless and widows in their affliction." We, he's like, "You guys have just missed the whole point. Get back
Yes,
to this
yes,
basic thing." And that's one thing that I think eschatology, the way eschatology has helped shape my ethic, because I believe that Jesus, in a sense, is the new creation, and
yes,
that calls us to be participants in
yes,
its spread. And so, when
yes,
Revelation talks about the leaves of the tree of life, it doesn't say that the leaves of the tree of life are an instant fix that makes everything better all of a sudden. It
yes,
says the leaves of
yes,
the tree of life are being given for the healing of the nations. And if we
yes,
participate in that, that means not only we're not just standing on the sidelines watching, but we get to actively participate in the spread of the new creation. And that means being involved in outreach and helping people who are if facing different afflictions in this life, and maybe volunteering at a hospital or a nursing home or something like that, or being involved environmentally, and even if it's just picking up the trash off the side of the road. That's a way of living out the gospel, of being a part of a new creation, and helping
Ah.
helping things along towards justice, so to speak. It's so
And when you say that, that suddenly says, yes, there's a positive way that a healthy eschatology
right.
could help us be better people. And of course, if you think of a like that famous story in Matthew 25, where Jesus tells a story about, I was hungry and you fed me, and I was naked and you clothed me.
Yeah.
If we believe that the future is an invitation for us to learn that all the kindness we showed, that Jesus took that as being kindness to him,
Yes.
I think that would help us keep going when we might feel like giving up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And hmm, there's a lot to. We're already at 45
Yes.
minutes, and there's a lot to talk about right there.
Mm,
I want to before we kind of start to wind things up, I want to talk about something else that you mentioned in the book, and let me see if I can find the exact language here. I thought that I had written it down here. Basically, you were talking about having a circle of trust. Yeah, that's it.
yes.
You talking about having a circle of trust, because the truth is, I live in Northeast Alabama, in Marshall County, and mentioning global warming, that is a very polarizing term, as you mentioned a while ago,
Yes.
or even
Yeah.
what was the other one that you said? Was it environment?
Just the word environment
Yeah,
for
it
some
can.
people makes them nervous. Yeah.
That's right. And so it can be hard to have these kinds of conversations. And so
Mm,
when you feel that despair or you feel that sense of doom, you are, as you mentioned at one point in the book, you talk about how so many people are shut down. And so they
yeah.
go, okay, so it's not okay for me to share my feelings in this setting,
Mm,
right? And so you
yes.
mentioned about developing circles of trust. Um, let's start with this, though. What advice might you give to someone who lives in a place where global warming or climate change or even the word environment may be so polarizing that it seems to be an instant ticket to expulsion?
Yeah, yeah.
How would you
Well,
encourage? Yeah,
that's where a circle of trust could be important, to try to find some people who share your concern. Um, in other words, you can't change everybody who is firmly opposed. You can't change them to be like you,
yeah,
but you can, and you can't, in good conscience, change yourself to just fit in with them. But you can find a circle of two or three people, and you can. So you're not the only one thinking about this and talking about it.
yeah,
And uh, there have been times in my life where I didn't know a single person with whom I could speak freely. And I frankly prayed. I just say, God, please lead me to some people with whom I can speak freely.
yeah.
And we might be surprised where we find those people.
Mm.
Uh, yeah. So that would be a place I'd start.
It's I know you've been how long have you been married, Brian?
Uh, 45 years this year.
45 years. And yet there's been
Yes.
times in your life where you felt like there was someone with whom you couldn't speak freely. I feel like I could tell, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I feel like I could tell my wife anything. But
Yes.
at the same time, there's this, we need to have someone else too. You know,
Yes.
we need to
Yeah.
have a circle of friends outside of our spouse, because sometimes that can be overwhelming to them. It can be, it can be a little bit much sometimes when you
Yeah.
unload on someone like that. And so you need to have a wider circle of trust, I think, at times. And um, a lot of people might not quite understand that, especially as pastors, right? Because we
Yes.
carry our work home with
Yes.
us, we live with it,
Yes.
right? And so
Yes.
sometimes I'm thinking, all right, does she really want to hear about what another member did, or what, this other
Yes.
situation I've dealt with? And so you need, I think one of my Episcopal friends says we have to keep this under the stole. So, uh, um, so the internet is great. You can find circles of trust online
Yeah.
instantaneously. Our podcast has a Facebook group where people engage in
Yeah.
discussion. I know you can create circles on Twitter or X, or even have
Yeah.
Zoom conversations like we're having right now. But there's something about a flesh and blood connection, face to
Yes.
face, walking alongside each other in a park, or sitting at a bench talking about these things, that really can really help you out mentally, spiritually, or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, what do you have any advice for people who are trying to seek to develop a circle of trust and they just don't know
Mm.
where to look? They just feel so isolated, like maybe Elijah.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'll tell you. when people remain silent, it keeps them isolated. And one of the things people can do is they can learn how to express themselves without asking for an argument. Um, my friend David Dark calls this exercising your right to not remain silent. Um, so you hear somebody make a dismissive comment about caring for the earth. I'm not a tree hugger, they say.
Yeah.
Well, you could either be quiet or you could say, listen, uh, I, you might not want to call me a tree hugger, but I really care about the earth. And I really feel that we human beings are not caring for the earth the way we should. And I'm trying to learn how to be a better carer of creation, right? You've been vulnerable. You haven't insulted them. You haven't picked a fight, but
Yeah.
you've told them what you're for and what you care about. And I would say this would be one of the best ways because you have the courage to do that. And somebody might say, gosh, I thought I was the only one. Somebody might be listening to you say that and come to you later and say, I really love the way you spoke up when so and so said such and such. I'm always afraid to do that. And because you had the courage to speak up, now I don't feel so alone.
That
And that's how
takes
these connections happen.
that
Yeah.
takes a lot of courage. Yeah. One of the difficulties about that, especially probably in the way that you were raised and the way that I was raised as well, is every doctrinal issue or every subject is a basically a life or death scenario. You have to get it
Yes.
right. And so to
Yes.
speak out against the tribe or the village
Yes.
elders or whatever is basically it's viewed as it's at least you feel that it would be viewed as picking a fight even if it's not, you know.
Yes.
Because even though you're
Yes.
told, hey, if you disagree with us in any way, please let us know. Show us where we're wrong, and we'll be willing to change. We want to see the truth, and that's all we care about is the truth. It seems like the people that say those things are really just trying to bait you into trust, so that you end
Yes.
up, exposing yourself as that wolf in sheep's clothing or whatever they might
Yes.
label you as. And so, I know that it can be so hard for people,
Yes.
even living within a generous community, to
Yes.
feel like they can express their mind and uh, it's almost a sign of post-traumatic stress disorder, that
Yes.
you talked a
Yes.
little bit about in the book. Yeah.
Yes. I know our time's almost up,
Oh
but
no, go go.
can I offer one simple thought about that?
Absolutely, for sure. You can offer more if
When
you want.
when we feel that kind of fear and that kind of stress, here's something I've experimented with, and it has usually worked out pretty well for me. Where before speak my truth, I speak a truth about how I feel about speaking my truth. And here's the way
Okay.
I would
All
say
right.
it.
Let's hear it.
Say,
Let's hear it.
I have something I want to say, but I'm really afraid if I say it, I'm going to be judged. So I don't know if it's safe for me to even speak my mind right now. I didn't, all I did is I self reported. I have some things to say about this, but I don't know if it's safe for me to say them here. I don't know if it will bother you all too much or if you'll get angry with me or you'll reject me
Yeah.
by me even having the courage to say that, sometimes what it'll do is make them say, no, I really want to know what you think. And if I don't feel safe, I might say to them, I'm really sorry. I just don't feel it.
Yeah.
Or I might say, are you telling me that you can promise me that you're not going to, change our relationship? If I say something that's different from the way you think, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not requiring you to agree with me. I do feel you might be requiring me. And then we have the conversation that needs to happen before it's safe for that other conversation to happen.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. And it's also signaling to people that you would be a safe person to talk to.
Yes.
If they're sitting in the
Yes.
same small group
Yes.
setting or maybe at a restaurant, they hear that and they go, "Wait a minute, he's actually.
Yes.
I could talk to him about this later after we get away after we get away from this
Exactly
setting."
right.
Um,
Exactly right.
Another thing I would throw out there, Brian, is there are all kinds of communities who meet for a few days out of the year, maybe a week out of the year, and it's not a lot of flesh and blood time, but it's helpful. For example,
Yes.
discovering renewal. You lead this retreat at Montreat every year in the mountains of North Carolina. I've gone since its inception, and I love it. When I first went, it reminded me of a scene in one of your novels where
Mm.
Dan finds this group that meets from all
Yes.
different traditions. And you're going to love this. One of the guys is wearing a shirt that says, I'm not that kind of Baptist. And so I've got a shirt that
Yes.
says, I'm not that kind of Campbellite.
I love
And
it.
so it's
I
possible to
love
find
it.
a community of people like that, and you could even form your own
Yes.
in those Facebook groups. If you meet some people who you can tell aren't secretly serial killers or something like that, you might say, hey, there's a state park near my house. We have some primitive camping sites, or maybe a cabin we could all go in on and rent together, and establish just a yearly
Yes.
retreat together. And
That's it.
it's possible. It's possible. Well, Brian, I thank you so much for coming on. You know that I love you and I appreciate your ministry and your writings, and I look forward to digging more and more into this book, and I hope that other people will pick it up as well. And in sort of the spirit of the book, what they should probably do to order it is to go to a to go to a local brick and mortar bookstore and have them order it for you. It's going to
Mhm.
cost a couple dollars more. It's going to take maybe 4 or 5 extra days to get to the to get into your hands, but it would be supporting more of a local business and
Mm.
and not so much as if you were to order it off somewhere like
Yes.
Amazon or something like that.
Yeah.
It might uh, be with a little
Uh,
bit more within the spirit of the book.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. So grateful for you and your beautiful ministry and this podcast because it creates a place where I'm sure some people listen and they think I'm not the only one asking these questions,
Yeah.
and you're creating a little circle of trust in the world through this. So keep
Oh,
up the
thank
good
you,
work, my
Brian.
friend.
I appreciate that, and I'll be sure we'll put links in the description to Brian's website, and he posts things on there about what he's up to and where he's speaking and what he's involved in, and so you can follow him there as well as on his social media pages to keep in touch with him and his ministry. Um, Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you are blessed by this book as I have been, and I hope that you will learn to discover the life after doom, to have a healthy kind of active hope, to discover the and in contemplation and action, and that all together we can work together to expand this new creation and to be a source of healing for the nations, a source of reconciliation, and not continued division. So, with that being said, God bless, and we'll see you in the next episode.